the situations that God may present to us in which he's trying to bring goodness out of are always better than the crosses that we choose ourselves. Because we as human beings have free will, right? Sometimes we choose for God, sometimes we choose against God. And whenever we choose against God, we think that maybe me doing this, my will is going to be better than God's will, right? And oftentimes that can create a cross or a struggle. And it's just like deep humility inside yourself to be able to see that that cross that I choose for myself is never going to be better than the cross that's given to me. Hello and welcome back to the Stand Firm Project. My name is Father Jordan Dosch, Vocation Director for the Diocese of Bismarck. When I was in high school, I don't think I fell in love with reading quite yet. It wasn't until I finally got into seminary where I saw the benefit of reading. And you're in high school and you're assigned all these readings. And looking back now, I knew that I was assigned very good books, but there were ones where I was just not in a position to be able to read them, really. Except for a couple books. A couple really stick out to me. One is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. It's a book that was assigned to me, and I got into it without really knowing the effect that it probably would have on me, but it's something that has stayed for me for many, many years. Viktor Frankl, who's very famous, I'm sure a lot of people know, was a psychologist who went through a concentration camp, and he wrote this book, Man's Search for Meaning, trying to figure out how a man persevered through struggle, through adversity, really, and him being a psychologist in a concentration camp was just the most extreme situation for him to be able to see how does a man persevere through this, right? So I believe he even had his transcripts and he was writing beforehand, and then World War II breaks out and he gets thrown into a concentration camp. And I believe in the book, they said the suicide rate was almost 2/3. And he was kind of thinking about why did some guys persevere through probably the most horrendous situations that human beings have lived through? That 1/3 of people, what was it that motivated them to continue to live in these very terrible situations? And he saw that if guys were able to find meaning for their suffering, then they were able to almost withstand anything. And for a lot of guys that were in that camp, the idea was being able to see their family again. And he monitored that if guys heard that their family members died, that they would almost commit suicide the next day because their meaning in their life was taken away. Therefore, the idea of persevering through the struggle was gone. And it's a beautiful book. The explanation that I gave does not justify the great book. I really do encourage you to read it. But the thought that has just really stuck with me in what he kind of concludes is that suffering is a part of life. That suffering is something that every human being will go through. And oftentimes when we try to think about where is this coming from, why is this happening, what good is going to come from this, we lose the focus of focusing on the struggle itself instead of maybe what will motivate us on the other side of why do I continue to be faithful in the midst of this struggle. And I think each person, when they're faced with adversity, they have the ability to choose to become bitter or to become faithful. And as Catholics, we believe that God will bring goodness out of suffering. And it can be hard for us to realize because that goodness, which we believe that he'll bring out of suffering, isn't always evident to us, right? It isn't always clear about what good is going to come from this. But the idea that an omniscient God, someone who's much more knowledgeable than I am, and a human being who's limited in my understanding, I trust that an omniscient God who can take everything into consideration can see how the little struggle that I'm going through is minuscule to the good that may come from it in the end. And in that moment, I have the ability to become faithful or to become bitter. When I was in seminary, I remember I had my vocation director, Father Josh Waltz, right, who's also a presenter on this, was visiting the seminary. And we were hanging out one evening, catching up. And the rector of the seminary joined us, and we were in a discussion about what I was going to be doing the next day, right? And long story short, the vocation director wanted me to do one thing, and the rector wanted me to do another thing. And they were kind of like arguing with each other. And it was really funny, and it was great. And the rector just looked at Father Josh Waltz, and he just said, "I was your rector also. This is what he's going to be doing." And it was really funny. But the reason that I brought that up is because he ended that conversation by saying, we don't need to go looking for our own crosses. He saw that the thing that was being proposed to me may be a struggle that I may just be adding to myself that doesn't necessarily need to be there. And it was something that I always thought about, and in connection to Viktor Frankl, the idea of like suffering, or especially like in our Catholic life, the idea that oftentimes crosses are given to us. And it's something that has really stuck with me, that the crosses that are given to us are always better than the crosses we choose or make for ourselves. The crosses, the situations that God may present to us in which he's trying to bring goodness out of, are always better than the crosses that we choose ourselves. Because we as human beings have free will, right? Sometimes we choose for God, sometimes we choose against God. And whenever we choose against God, we think that maybe me doing this, my will is going to be better than God's will, right? And oftentimes that can create a cross or a struggle. And it's just like deep humility inside yourself to be able to see that that cross that I choose for myself is never going to be better than the cross that's given to me. And the idea with Viktor Frankl that like suffering is a part of life, right? And oftentimes we just think that I just need to get rid of this cross. This cross just like can't be in my life. But whether it's Viktor Frankl or myself as a seminarian, it's like, no, there's going to be crosses. But the ones that are given to me are always better than the ones that I choose myself. And whenever I face that crossroads, I always have the opportunity to either become bitter or to become faithful. And whenever I become bitter and I start thinking, why did God give me this? You know, how could a good God allow for this? What good is going to come from this? Or I knew better, or I should have done this. Whenever we become bitter, that prevents God from bringing goodness out of the situation. As a priest, I talk to a lot of people, and I have to say, like, honestly, one of the most edifying things is when I'm up celebrating Mass and I'm looking out and I see someone who I know is struggling, and I can see that they're being faithful in the midst of that struggle. That's one of the most edifying things that I can experience, because I know that they're going through a lot, and I see that they're choosing to be faithful to God. And it's because of that that he is then going to be allowed to bring goodness out of the situation. And it's just a very humbling thing, being able to look back on our life, to be able to see my life could have been very different if I chose to become bitter, or if I didn't continue to be faithful in that moment. So when we go throughout our days, and there's going to be ups and downs. There will be ups and downs. There'll be times where we feel close to God. There's times where we're going to feel far from God. As Viktor Frankl taught, it isn't necessarily important to focus on like that struggle itself, because struggle is a part of life. And oftentimes, if that cross isn't something that is because of my own sinfulness or my own shortcomings, that it's something that God is allowing my life to, as we would say, bring goodness out of that situation. And even though it's hard, and it is a cross, and it is a struggle, and there is suffering, because there is suffering in life, I have that opportunity to either become bitter or faithful. And I just beg you to stay faithful. That this isn't just for your life. This is, we're the body of Christ. We do this together. And allowing people to persevere through the struggle will allow God to bring goodness to the world and to everyone's life. So throughout your life, if you're going through that, just don't be afraid to bring that to God in prayer. Don't be afraid to ask for help from your friends. Talk to a priest about it. Talk to a psychologist, to a counselor. Do whatever you can. But don't become bitter. Stay faithful in the midst of that struggle, and I promise that God will bring goodness out of it. Thank you for listening. God bless.